Welcome to Reach, your platform to connect with other executive assistants and acquire game-changing knowledge and perspective. Reach is designed to inspire your workday, guide you through pivotal moments in your career, and transform you into the executive assistant you've always wanted to be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reach. I'm Jessica Van, host and founder and CEO of Maven Recruiting Group. And today's episode, we are going to be welcoming a longtime Maven favorite, somebody very near and dear to me, Michael Cooper, Coop as he likes to be referred to, whose work has been truly transformative in helping executives and their teams align to collaborate and perform more effectively. Coop's work spans a bunch of different areas. So he's done everything from executive coaching to leadership accelerators to team alignment workshops. And my personal favorite, his powerful brain types framework, which we will be getting into further on in the show. But this is essentially a tool that helps decode how people think, how they communicate and perform, how to relate to them in the most effective manner, and also how they show up, especially under pressure, which I think is a very, very key point. With over 20 years as an executive coach, Coop's focus and frameworks continue to evolve, and he continues to find new muses and things to satisfy his intellectual curiosity as well as the demands of his clients. Currently, his latest fascination being in the area of creating and sustaining high-performing teams, and that's something that we're going to speak about further today. On a personal note, I've hired Coop 2 times to work with Maven's team when we were dealing with just a kind of a broad range of challenges, both internal and external, and I have been blown away by the enduring relevance and applicability of everything that you've taught us, so much so that it's really, your teachings are used unanimously and ubiquitously on the daily amongst our team members. Even those who haven't even met you personally use your trainings because we train them to know what this brain types is all about. So really excited to have Coop here. It's an honor. For those of our listeners today who feel like you at times really struggle to understand your executive or to get on the same page or to know what they're thinking or how to relate to them, I think that Coop's wise words are really going to resonate for you. Or if you're just looking to unlock more about your own personal performance and potential or that of your executive, I also think that there's a lot for you to gain today. So glad to have you with us, Coop.
Really glad to be here. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's one of the best I've ever had. So really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I find that hard to believe, but thank you. So let's start with your story. How did you become a leadership coach, and what led you to founding your most recent company, which is High Performance Orgs?
Yeah, so I was in software development and management consulting right out of graduate school, and it was right when every internet company needed warm bodies during the IT gold rush, and I was working in New Zealand on a big project. We were building large-scale systems, things for Honda and Seagate and Vodafone and Verizon and large companies like that. And I was in a project in New Zealand, and my manager came in and brought an article about coaching. And she said, "I think you'd be great at this, and I want to be your first client." And I thought, can I read the article? Like, what are you even talking about? And I was so intrigued by the article that I logged on that night, found the only coach training program in the world at the time, was one of the first 250 coaches ever trained. And it really has completely changed my life. But there's a backstory that we'll get to in a little bit about I had burned out in that role and switched roles to do what I do now. And I had been coaching, I just didn't know what it was called. And my manager saw that in me. And that happened a lot throughout my career. People see things in me that I don't quite see in myself, and then I kind of stumble into them and figure them out.
sometimes I feel like there's these angels that are placed in our path, and it sounds like she was that for you in sort of offering you this possibility.
Absolutely. And we ended up working together for years. I still work with her now. I still coach her occasionally. She's the SVP of strategy for Oracle,
Wow.
but definitely an angel in my life. And how I really got involved with high performance orgs now is I started to notice that executives were really good at one or two critical skills. But there were, three or four others that they really kind of lacked, and it would affect how the team performed, how the entire organization performed. So I started collecting these patterns from, if this executive was really good at this, how did they actually do that? How did they think through that? And then I would share it with other executives, and we started getting results much faster, that sort of thing. And so that's how high performance orgs came into being. And we really focus on three areas: how to lead yourself as a high performer, how to build and lead high performing teams, and then how to influence and lead high performing organizations.
So to drill a little bit deeper on that, so you've coached some of the most high performing, high growth leaders out there. So what have you seen that high performers consistently do differently than the rest of the lot?
There's quite a few skills, but we've really boiled them down to: number one, schedule and actively guard time for strategic thinking and deep work, meaning, 2 to 3 hours a day of actual doing work that's uninterrupted, those sorts of things. So many executives end up, and so many other professionals end up in meetings all day, every day. They don't get their real work done. And so we've got to carve out that time for deep work to make sure that we can actually do the things that our jobs really require us to do. That's number one. Number two is really invest in the emotional environment. The funny thing about, we're all stressed out. A lot of people are really overwhelmed right now. A lot of burnouts happening. And, when we're under stress, we're not our most resourceful. We don't do our best work. We don't bring our best selves into the office every day. And so it can affect the emotional environment around us. But that emotional environment accounts for 30% of the financial performance in an organization. And so high performers recognize that, invest in that emotional environment. And part of that is, really recognizing how people are reacting to things, making sure that they're, for brain type's perspective, really communicating to the brain type that someone has. So they're setting them up for success. They're much better at defining problems. So many teams, about 70% of what we work on are symptoms of problems. High performers really try to get to the root cause. What is the actual problem that we're trying to solve? And they switch between strategy and execution really fluidly. Most people are so stuck in the weeds every day, they don't come up and actually think strategically about the problem that they have. And last thing is, they really prioritize high value work, high value activity. And I always coach people that, if you can prioritize ruthlessly, that's what high performers really do. So some of it's structural, some of it's skill set, some of it's mindset, and some of it's a tool set. We try to equip people with all of those.
So what I just heard is the single greatest endorsement for why every executive should have an executive assistant. Because quite literally, everything you said, from protecting and guarding time, that's like priority number one for an EA, is making sure that time is spent in the most conscientious and impactful way. And like what you said, actually protecting, safeguarding time for the strategy work and the deep, thoughtful work. And I mean, that I hear that all the time from executives of, I need to create this space, but I'm incapable. I feel too encumbered. I can't do it. That's like,
right. Can't find time for it.
Can't find it. So there you go. Like, this is the greatest justification I've ever heard for an EA. So there's that. Then you talked about investing in the emotional environment. Okay. Again, like, every really astute EA I know is incredibly dialed into the emotional environment and extracting that information and sharing it with the executive who may have a blinder around that. strategy and
or may
execution
not
piece,
care, right?
or
At
may not
times,
care,
but needs
absolutely,
to care.
but then drawing their awareness to that and saying, well, this is why this is actually relevant, and translating that to impact. And then being able to toggle between the strategy and execution piece that you mentioned, that there's a vital role there for the EA. And then lastly, prioritizing the high value activity. I mean, I think that's exactly what they do, is they buttress their executive from the low level activity, or gently and firmly point out what is irrelevant to the executive and they shouldn't be spending their time on anyway. So there you go. I think this is so fascinating, because to me, there's such a synchronicity between what you're saying are the tenets of high performance and the justification of how an executive assistant can ultimately support and contribute to that high performance.
And how really someone with a really good assistant becomes a much higher performer, because the assistant really provides this structure, holds people accountable, tells them where their blind spots are, those sorts of things. But the executive needs to be good at these things too. You can't just rely on the executive assistant to, kind of enforce all of that structure for you, provide all those skills, that sort of thing. So it is a really symbiotic relationship. I always say that executive assistants and I, often we're led into this world for executives that is very rarefied. Most people don't understand the stress, the pressure, how lonely it is, how isolating it is for people. We get inside their brains and how they operate and tick, and the people around them. So we do a lot of the same work. And so, it's great that for you to recognize this is a great business case for executive assistants, but it's also high performance. Like, executive assistants can be high performers, and they will make their executives even higher performers because they're such high performers themselves.
Yeah, totally. And that's, of course, a valuable point that you make too, which is that the EA is not a substitute for this executive possessing these skills on their own. And obviously that's where your work comes in, is in helping to cultivate those skills and develop them where they may be underdeveloped. But yes, it is absolutely symbiotic. So that is fascinating. We talked a little bit in the intro about the brain types framework, which is one of the modules that I mentioned that you teach. Can you share more about what that framework is, and specifically what the 4 types are, and how understanding that can help people come to know themselves more deeply and also have more effective, deeper relationships with those that they work with?
Yeah, the brain types. First off, I'll tell you how I became aware of them. I was in the hospital, burned out, really, really sick. I'd been in a job that very technically demanding, writing code, dealing with spreadsheets, that sort of thing. I'm a people person. I'm not a data person.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like you.
I was doing that work, and I was doing a decent job, but I was exhausted at the end of the day. And when I realized, I came across this work called Brain Types by Catherine Benziger, and it really focuses on what our brains are. It's called neuroefficiencies. What is our highest neuroefficiency? And those are the things that we're really gifted at, the things that it takes 100 times less energy and oxygen and glucose to process information in the brain if you're in your area of giftedness. I always say it's like dial-up versus broadband. The people side, the strategy, the innovation, that's what lights me up. That's what I'm good at. That's asking, tough questions, those sorts of things. Those are the things that come naturally to me. Once I learned that, I changed my role at the software development company and the management consultant we were working for. I became much happier, much healthier, doing the work that really lit me up. And that's what when I became a coach, I brought that work into coaching. First, I want to explain, most people have heard of these 4 types their entire lives because TV and film adopted this work very early on. It's by a researcher named William Moulton Marston, who did this work in 1926. He's also the guy that created Wonder Woman, strangely enough. So cultural icon there. And in the years since, they've been able to use functional MRIs to, and this is what Benziger did, to prove that his theory on how people process information, what these brain types are, we've been able to map it in the brain in the last 5 years. So to use science to validate it. But TV and film adopted this early on. Every sitcom has 4 characters. They're one of the 4 brain types. I know Friends broke the mold, had 6 characters. Take that, throw that one away. But every other sitcom, let's just use a real famous one that most people know is I Love Lucy. I might be dating myself here, but
Not to
Lucy
me.
was.
Yeah.
So I'll go through the 4 brain types and I'll describe the characters and how they match to those because it's easier for
Okay.
people to remember. The first brain type is called the controller manager brain type. And this is the folks who typically are in charge. They take a leadership role, even if they don't have the title. They really like to make sure the trains are running on time. They want to make sure that everybody knows kind of what the direction is. They want to make the decisions, those sorts of things. And most executives are these controller manager types. My guess is around 80% are controller managers. And that's in the sitcom, it's Ricky Ricardo. He's the one that had the club. He wasn't around. He wanted to make the decisions, that sort of
Clearly.
thing.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
clearly, the guy in charge, that sort of thing. And he was also on the show less than the other characters. And well, that's because he's always, off being productive, accomplishing things, that sort of thing. Next is the innovator influencer brain type. And this type is really looking for flexibility, recognition, and impact. This is the Lucy Ricardo, Lucille Ball's character. Um, and by the way, it's funny, most redheads are also innovator influencers. I'm not sure why that connection is there, but it's kind of fascinating. Innovators and influencers are only 15% of the population.
Huh.
Very few executives, unless you're in design or communication or creative field, very few executives are innovators and influencers, but we have them in particular industries, that sort of thing. The third type is called nurturer harmonizer. And this is really people who are really focused on relationships. They like things to be a little stable. They like predictability. They really love to be in support roles. They love to help other people. They're called nurturer harmonizers, and that is the Ethel Mertz character, and she's always supporting Lucy no matter what crazy stuff she gets into, that sort of thing. And then the final one is the fourth category, that's called the analyzer systemizer. And these are the folks that typically are your engineers, your accountants, your legal folks. There's a lot of information. There's a very methodical, really focused on safety, scalability, security, things like that. So that was Fred. He was the superintendent of the building. He fixed things, that sort of thing. So those are the 4 main types. And when you know these types, the funny thing is what's really built in is our motivators, our fears, our stress responses, and our information needs. And, most executive assistants are probably really good at figuring out which one of the executives they're supporting, either the controller manager or the innovator influencer, nurturer harmonizer, or analyzer systemizer. We have a lot of analyzer systemizers, particularly in technology, coming out of IT and then moving into executive roles, that sort of thing. And so most people know if they've got the controller manager, they want the bottom line, they want the executive summary. They don't overload them with a lot of information. Give them succinct, take them options. So a good thing would be, here are 2 options. I recommend option B because it's the fastest. That really builds trust. It helps them think through really quickly versus giving them tons of information that they don't want to take in to try to make that decision. For an analyzer systemizer, as an example, if you're an executive assistant, you'd want to take them as much information as possible, right? But you want to make sure it's organized. It's in a logical kind of progression of information, things build on each other versus being scattered, that sort of thing. And so yes, they want a lot of information, but it should be methodical. It should be sequential. It should be logically laid out. It should build to a conclusion, those sorts of things. So I know I gave you a lot of information about the brain types. I always say if you can communicate directly to the brain type, people's motivators, if we know what their fears are, let's avoid their fears if at all possible. Their stress responses, like an example, when we're under stress, I said earlier, we aren't as resourceful as we normally are. So somebody a controller manager, if they like things to feel like they're under control, once they get stressed out, they feel like things are out of control and they become more and more autocratic. Eventually, they're going to make the final decision. It's going to be this way or the highway, that sort of thing, depending on how stressed they get. So once we really know the triggers for people, we can proactively avoid those. And most people who are in executive roles are nurturer harmonizers, right? We love to support other people. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. I often see a little bit of conflict between the controller manager and the nurturer harmonizer. And it's typically the nurturer harmonizers, the executive assistants, think the executive is too pushy, too aggressive, unrealistic expectations, too fast, those sorts of things, which, can really go against the wanting a little stability and predictability and focusing on relationship and tone and the things that most executive assistants prioritize themselves because of their brain type.
I think there's a lot of head nodding for me going on because I think that for the executive assistants who are just wondering, how to package information or how to present information or feeling like sometimes things don't land in the way that they would want them to land or expect them to land, I think really taking a moment to reflect on these brain types and this overview that you just provided is such a massive unlock because, again, if you're trying to talk to a controller manager and you're presenting them in this very flowery way and this very meandering sort of a thing, I mean, you're just going to trigger every annoyance in their entire body, right? So it's like figuring out how to map that, number one, and then how to apply that to the way that you show up in your work, in your role, and the way that you present information is so vital. So I know that the module that you do goes into a lot of explicit depth, and having gone through it, it's a 2-day program. Like it's a thing, but it was so powerful for us because it was like, not only does it go through how to actually diagnose the brain types, but then it goes through like, what is their love language? What is their currency? What are their stressors? How to avoid their stressors? How to think about, how to reframe things to avoid stressors. So it's really, it goes very, very deep. But yeah, I'm a big fan.
Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. And, I think the first thing is, the first rule of communication is to adjust for your audience. And I know a lot of people in the day-to-day, it's hard to forget that. One thing to keep in mind is we often communicate to people the way we want things to be explained or told or heard. But if we're in a support role to somebody else, we really do have to adapt to make sure that we're setting them up for success. And we really do need to communicate in a way that is, in the technical term, is called into their best listening, meaning the things that their brain is already scanning for and avoiding those things that are real irritators. So like for a controller manager, their biggest irritator is wasting their time. And so if you have the flowery language and you're not getting to the point, it's not really the flowery language, it's you're wasting my time that's really getting triggered. And once you know those, you can really adapt so that you make sure that you set them up for success, but they're going to appreciate you a lot more. You're going to get better raises and promotions, those sorts of things, because you're really serving in a capacity that lets them become a higher performer than they would be on their own.
Right. And it could be something as seemingly innocuous as starting every conversation with, "Hi, how's it going? How are you today? How was your weekend?" Which may seem innocuous enough as the executive assistant talking to her executive. But if your executive is a extreme controller manager, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Coop, but like that's wasted time. That's like, can we just get to the point? Like, what is the actual point of this call?
Yeah, and I think the thing to keep in mind is they just want to get to the business first. They want to make sure the highest value thing is tackled. It's not that they don't want to have a conversation about the weekend. If that's tackled and then there's room and space, a couple minutes to have the conversation about your weekend, they're fine to have that. But if you're doing it first, you're actually making them nervous that they're not going to actually tackle the most important thing, the highest value activities, those sorts of things.
Yep. Exactly. So what's a common friction point that you see when brain types clash? Like, what are the most common points of friction? And how can an EA listening today use that awareness to potentially diffuse or even prevent a future tension?
Yeah, the most common tensions I see is if a controller manager is supported by a nurture harmonizer. And the biggest problem there is the nurture harmonizers are so nice. They never speak up for themselves and advocate for what should change, or they rarely do. And so they kind of stew in silence. And the controller managers aren't even aware that the nurture harmonizers are irritated, demotivated, those sorts of things. And so, I'm not defending the behavior, that sort of thing. That's naturally there's a dynamic tension built in between those two types, just because controller managers are a little more aggressive. Nurture harmonizers aren't as aggressive, appreciate things, that stability that we talked about, those sorts of things. And so often, how it normally shows up is nurture harmonizers feel like it's rushed. It can feel harsh. It can feel like tone deaf, things like that. And a lot of nurture harmonizers are really sensitive to that because they have to be, because they are investing in that emotional environment for sometimes on the behalf of the executive, because the executive is too busy or thinks it's not important, those sorts of things. And so that's the biggest conflict I see, is just there's a type, we say type A, or the controller managers, they're hard charging, that sort of thing. It takes someone who's really, understands that it's not personal, that that's just the way they're going to operate. And if you can understand that and really try to support that versus getting triggered by it, you can really eliminate a lot of the tension that's there. But the sad thing about that tension is it's very rarely talked about, because nurture harmonizers just tend to stuff it down.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. Yeah. I'd say the bulk of our clients are controller managers. I'm sure the bulk of your clients are the same. Or analyzer systemizers, which is, that's the map of Silicon Valley, which is where both of us, I think, do the most work. So,
Absolutely.
So there's that. And then we have the majority of our candidate population being the executive assistant community. Easily 90% of them are nurture harmonizers. You have the occasional controller manager, innovator, influencer, and also analyzer systemizer in there as well. But the vast majority are nurture harmonizers. So you have sort of this fundamental kind of odd pairing just from the very beginning, from the outset. And so being aware of that, I think, is so instructive.
Yeah, and I'll just say a strange comment, but I've only met one CEO who is a nurture harmonizer, and he has two really strong controller managers reporting into him, and they really run the business, that sort of thing. But it's fascinating that the really population, and we do default to things that we're naturally good at. That's what the brain type says, and support roles are naturally good at supporting people, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, out of curiosity, what type of company does the Nurturer Harmonizer CEO run?
I have to be careful with client confidentiality, but they're in the real estate space.
Real estate, okay.
And they really help build, design, and manage very large-scale condo towers, that sort of thing.
Okay. I was going to guess something like nonprofit, something or other, but no, not at all.
No.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
But the design, the aesthetic that this person has is, and really thoughtful about amenities and the experience. So very much a relational nurture harmonizer thing versus the design side is this person's kind of forte and what put them on the map.
Yeah. Interesting. So you teach that under stress, these brain types can kind of default to this specific behaviors. And you talked a little bit about that earlier, about kind of the controller manager becoming very autocratic and dictatorial, which we definitely saw with Ricky Ricardo. He was always like, Lucy, and like flying off the handle, and he would get into, I told you, I was a big I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball fan growing up. I actually, somewhere in my backyard is a memorial plaque that I buried for her as like a 9-year-old when she died. And I literally made a grave for Lucy. So Anyway, but you talked about how, under stress, they default to certain behaviors. So as an EA, what should you be on the lookout for if you start to see kind of certain default behaviors surfacing? That's a signal to you. So what might that look like, and what should be the tell there?
Yeah, it's different for each type. So the controller manager, they get more and more autocratic, like I was saying. And so the most important thing to recognize there is that that's a signal that they are stressed out. And sometimes it's just, what can I remove off their plate? What stress can I relieve? What would be a stress reliever for them? Sometimes there is nothing, right? They're just in that space. But even asking, can I take something off your plate? Can I, you don't always want to say, I noticed that you're really stressed. Sometimes that doesn't always go well, but just, what can I recognize that there's a lot of stress. How can I support you in removing or reducing some of that is one. For innovators and influencers, when they're stressed out, they start a lot of things. They don't always finish them. They can get really distracted. They'll often, and I'm an innovator influencer brain type, so I'm being really honest here, outing ourselves. We do something called leaps of logic, meaning we're kind of thinking like chess. We're playing several steps ahead, but we can skip steps, get really excited about that, not really focus on, okay, all the steps have to happen for us to get there. And so it can be confusing. It can be, people feel like they can't really trust it if they get too kind of manic from the innovator influencer perspective. We can also overwhelm other people with ideas when we're really stressed out too. And so in that case, EA could say, how do we capture can we capture your ideas? Can we get them on paper? Can we make sure that the priorities are the right ones? Can we bring them back to what matters most? Those sorts of things is a way to support someone there. Nurture harmonizer, when they're really stressed out, they really get quiet. They really kind of withdraw. They're very social. They're not as social, and they can really kind of over accommodate others at their own expense. And so what we often have to do for them, and I always, when I come in and work with teams like yours, if they're nurture harmonizers on the team, I'm like, look, you don't have a history of advocating for yourself. So I want you to think about what you really want and need, and how to advocate, and what boundaries you need to set for yourself, and make sure that, they're really emotionally not kind of stuffing things down, becoming resentful, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
You want to check in with them privately, though, for nurture harmonizers. You want to really ask what they're worried about and not saying, things like that. Get them to kind of open up about it if you can. Sometimes they do need just time to process on their own. That's okay. For analyzer systemizers, they can really get in the weeds, go into data analysis, really kind of get stuck in analysis paralysis, delaying decisions, really missing deadlines, things like that. And so really the best thing for them is to help them narrow options, or what's at 70% that we can move forward, get them out of the full analysis and try to make some incremental progress. So different for each one.
Right.
And if you know your executive, you're probably doing some of that already. It's good to know that it's the right impulse if you're doing it. And also you can ask, if it's for everybody, what is the stressors? What stressors can we reduce? Because as long as they're stressed out, they're going to continue acting in these manners. Right. Their brain is kind of hardwired to do that.
So shifting gears a little bit,
Okay.
You coach teams and executives on mindset, and the skill set and the tool set for high performance, right? So mindset, skill set, tool set. Which of these three do you think is often overlooked, but at the same time, very, very critical for performance?
Definitely mindset. And a lot of times people jump to conclusions, they see a problem and they automatically come up with a solution, that sort of thing. Or they jump to a tool or a tactic that they know. But if you have the wrong mindset, you're going to solve the problem in a different way. Really, you have to think about, what strategically is the problem? How should we approach this? What is the outcome we're really shooting for? Do we have the right system? Do we have the right method to achieve that outcome? Those sorts of things. And so mindset is huge. And most people have been rewarded for the mindset that they have. We get promoted, we get new jobs, that sort of thing. But there comes a point, particularly in executive roles, that mindset is harder. It has to shift a little bit more. And if executives, assistants can see that, like if we get so, focused on one problem that we're missing other things, that's a mindset issue. If we, start to take things out on people and it becomes personal versus, be ruthless with problems, be gentle with people, those sorts of things. And so, mindset can have a lot to do with how we approach everything. And so mindset is the first thing we try to work on, and we work on it within problems. And so you can go from, okay, my team is here to support me versus I'm here to support my team. That's a completely different mindset shift. But a high performer is there to support their team, not to get a team to support them, because that means they are the bottleneck. They are, yes, they could be moving the whole company forward, but at some point the company is going to be moving faster than they are, that sort of thing. So mindset is, we work on it. And of the 24 skills that we've developed around the Leadership Accelerator, around how to become a high performer, there's a mindset component in every single one of them, a skill set component in every one, and then a tool set. But we always get the mindset right first so that you can use the tools and the skills and the way to get you the outcomes that you want.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like the mindfulness institutes and places like that, I mean, they talk a lot about getting quiet and not kind of launching yourself head on into the issue, but like getting in the right frame, right? Getting the right mindset, getting the right state. That state really determines everything. And I know just from life, like when you're approaching problems with this frantic, woe is me, catastrophic type of approach, like I don't think I've ever come up with a good solution in that mindset. But when you like take a moment to assess in a more methodical, calm way, I mean, it's a completely different outcome.
Absolutely. When we started looking at, what do high performers do around the globe? What do the Marines teach people to, if they're under stress, how to make decisions? Right. What do F1 drivers? What do surgeons? What do
ER doctors,
air traffic
ICU,
control, ER doctors, that sort of thing? And what we started to notice is there's the exact same things. Something called box breathing to regulate your nervous system. Right. Things like that. And so we teach that as part of the what's called the self-regulation piece. That's one part of it. Yeah. But then there's the mindset around, this particular problem. How are you thinking about this problem? Do you have a bias against this particular issue or problem? And is that causing you to solve it a different way? Those sorts of things. And so mindset can cover so many areas.
Yeah, I love that. So much to unpack there. You also talk about trust and emotional intelligence and something you call feed forward, which I don't know what that is, so you'll have to explain that. And that these are key tools in the Leadership Accelerator. So what are those, I guess, number one, but then what do those look like when done well, particularly like in an EA executive partnership?
Yeah, let me ask you, I'll flip your question on you for a second.
Okay.
What,
of course you will.
That
old coaching trick.
I'll give you the answer after. But if you don't trust someone, how does that affect your performance, your interaction with someone? Particularly, let's just say that you don't trust your executive, as an example, and you're an EA. What does that? Yeah. How does that affect you?
If I don't trust my executive, I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling insecure about how we're going to kind of solve things, resolve things. I'm feeling unsupported if I don't trust them. I think it's like fundamentally, it's a very destabilizing place to be. You're sort of like in this teetering place all the time of not really quite knowing how it's all going to work out for the best.
Yeah, and all that, what that really does is slow everything down. You
Mm-hmm.
overthink things. You don't really get into action, make decisions, get stuff done, move the needle, that sort of thing. And so trust, the biggest thing about trust is its speed. When you trust someone, you can do things much, much faster because you can
Mm-hmm.
anticipate what they want and need and those sorts of things. And what we try to do is look at how is trust built in organizations across teams, that sort of thing. And we came up with 8 dimensions that we call. The first one is benevolence. Are we on the same team? Are we trying to accomplish the same goal, the same mission, the same outcome? Are we headed in the right direction? Is there a reason for us to even collaborate and come together? If we act in a benevolent way, we're acting towards that thing, if that makes sense. So
Mm-hmm.
benevolence is one of those things we're already kind of quickly, subconsciously assessing about the people that we interact with on a daily basis. Are we on the same team or not? Are they friend or foe? Really is what that question is. And then it's care personally is the second one. I always call these to the gatekeepers. If you're not on the same, there's no reason to be on the same team, and they don't care about your personal health, happiness, and well-being. All the other components of trust are kind of hard to have or hard to build. And so these two, you've got to think about, does my executive want me to have a life outside of work? Or do they want me to work all weekend? That sort of thing. That would be, they don't care about my personal health, happiness, and well-being, right? So those are the first two. And then it goes through competence. Can they do the skill and do they have the motivation to do what's required? Then integrity. Are they a person of their word? Can I actually trust what they say and act on what they say? Then results. Are they someone who just talks a big game or do they actually deliver results? We tend to trust
Mm-hmm.
people more that deliver results consistently. Then reliability. And this one is, takes a little bit of a history to be able to evaluate something. But in the past, have we been able to rely on this person? The longer that we've known them, the longer they've been reliable, the higher the trust that we have for them. The seventh one is sincerity. Is this person actually communicating in a way that's effective for what we're trying to do? Is this an emergency and they're just blowing it off? Is there any duplicity? Does it feel off in their communication? That's what sincerity is really about. And then the last one is challenge directly, which is, can I go to this person and resolve difficult issues in a healthy, successful way? If I can challenge them directly. If I can't, I may not trust them as much. And so we really looked at, what does it take for teams to build trust? And if you have all 8 of these, what does that do for the team? And it makes everything across the board a lot easier and faster for everybody involved. And so what we do is have you actually evaluate every person on the team against these 8 dimensions of trust,
Mm.
and gives a score of 1 to 5, 5 being high, 1 being low. And anything that has 3 or below, we have you figure out what is the work to do there to repair that trust, to actually increase that sort of thing. So that's trust. And that's so fundamental to everything else. We start with something called psychological safety, which is really, do I belong here? Can I learn, take risks, make mistakes? Am I set up to really deliver value? And can I make change around here? Those are the 4 levels of psychological safety. That's what we start with, because if teams don't feel that, everything else is harder. And then we
Mm-hmm.
bolt trust on top of that. Then we look at emotional intelligence, really reading the room, understanding that there are specific emotions that mean very specific things. Like if you're angry at me, what it really means is that I have corrupted your boundaries in some way. I have not honored your boundaries. And so if you are angry, it's really important for you to recognize that's a signal to put your boundaries back in place, which most people don't know. And if you know that as kind of an EA or somebody as a high performer, you can quickly see, we can read it on someone's face when they're angry. We can physically see it. We can map it in the body, those sorts of things. And so now if we know what it means, we can be supportive of that person to put their boundary back in place, to honor that, to get them back in a quote healthy place again. And so we really go through the five emotions. It's fear, anxiety, guilt and shame, and when have antipathy, when we're just kind of fried, those sorts of things. Those are the ones that we have to really look out for in a team and address those. And when everybody knows and can see those, we can be a lot more supportive of each other. And then I know you asked me about feed forward. So feed forward is, if you think about feedback, most people, let's just go back to the traditional, we get a paper back in school from a professor, and it's all marked up in red. That's feedback. It's disturbing, it's emotional, it's pointing to the mistakes, but we probably aren't learning a lot from it. It's not telling us what we want, what success is, what we should be doing instead, how to approach this problem differently. Sometimes that's scrawled in the margins, but usually it's, these are editing marks, and you've got to remember, what does this mark mean? And so a lot of feedback is focused on what's wrong. Feed forward and what happens when we focus on what's wrong, this is something that neuroscience has taught us. Like, Jessica, let's say you made a mistake. And if I talk to you about that mistake, I'm activating the part of your brain that made the mistake, which means I'm strengthening the neural net so that you will more likely do it again. By talking about the mistake, I'm actually priming your brain to make the mistake again, which is crazy, right? But if I ask you, hey, could you do it this way? Or how would you do it differently next time? Feed forward is really focused on what do we take next? What's helpful? What allows this person to grow? What do we really want the outcome to be if we focus on that? Number one, it does a couple things. One, people don't get defensive. The biggest part about feedback is it's hard to hear, and people naturally get defensive. Harvard did a study on negotiation. It was a 30-year study, and their biggest takeaway from that is when we are defensive, we don't hear what is actually said from the other person. And so biggest thing about feed forward is you remove that defensiveness. You give them a clue about where to go, what to do next, that sort of thing. And so it's much more productive for them. It helps them learn faster. They don't have to go through I made a mistake, I'm bad, I did wrong, the whole beating themselves up internally that so many of us do. We get to skip that part if we do feed forward.
Yeah. Which, as people who are responsible for other people, and in the context of today's conversation, like, executives are responsible for the EAs who support them, for the teams around them. Being able to practice this ability, this skill set of feed forward instead of feedback could just be so massive, right? As like when you talk about accelerating performance. So can you give an example? Like, let's say an executive assistant executed, a leadership offsite or something like this. And they asked the executive, hey, how did that go? And they're looking for some constructive input. What's an example of feedback versus feed forward?
So first off, I think the question, how did it go, is kind of a vague question at times. Okay. And particularly if you're dealing with someone who's stressed out, a lot on their plate, they're not going to see it as, okay, did you really want something specific? Are you like, what do you actually want from me, right? So I think it's important to recognize that. I would probably recommend ask a better question. What was the most effective thing about the offsite that you think actually moved the needle for the team? So focus on, there's something called appreciative inquiry, and that is really focus on what's working, what worked well, what's going well, what do we need to maintain or do more of, that sort of thing. So often in business, we get focused on the problem. We focus on the negative. We don't really take a chance to acknowledge what's working well, to celebrate it, to understand, how we could do more of that sort of thing. And so that's where I would start first. But feedback would be, let's say the executive said, we didn't really get to the main conversation because we got distracted on something else. I wish we'd had a better agenda, something like that. Like that's, you didn't have the right agenda, right? Versus, I think that for the next time, we've got to have a much tighter agenda. We'd like to build in time for, people to really catch up because they were distracted with these sorts of things. But you're giving direction about what does success look like next. It's a simple flip, right? But the first one is you made a mistake. The agenda wasn't great. I'm complaining about that, making it your fault versus really, I didn't think about this in advance and set this up for all of us to have success. So let's make sure we both do that together next time. You can really co-own things and feed forward too.
Yeah. I mean, that just even though I'm not the person who's asking for the feedback in any real way in this example, I can actually feel viscerally the difference of the feedback versus the feed forward. And I didn't even plan this offsite. This is all hypothetical, but it just shows how sensitive we are to language and framing.
Yeah. When you feel that, you have to process all that. And that is going to take some time. And for some people, it's going to take a long time. And so it actually becomes a huge distraction. It becomes the resources that we could be focused on the actual solution. We're focused on dealing with the emotional labor that someone just handed us because they were kind of being lazy in their communication.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. Absolute sense. So if somebody listening today wants to begin building a high performance mindset, what's one small but powerful action they can start doing?
I'm going to give you 3 instead of 1, and here's why.
Yeah.
I think there's a structural thing that most people really have to figure out first, and then skills on top of that. So the first one I would say is really schedule time for strategic thinking and deep work, both of them. Strategic thinking is thinking ahead. Deep work is getting the main high value priorities for your job done in an uninterrupted way so that you can actually, accomplish the real core of your responsibilities. That's the first one. I've got a competitor, really famous coach in Silicon Valley, that if the CEO of the company they're working with won't set aside 2 hours a day for deep work, he won't work with them. It's like, you're not serious about growing your business if you're not willing to do that. We don't go to that extreme. We don't require it, but I strongly recommend it. The second one is really ruthless prioritization. It's a skill set, but how I teach it is there are high value activities and there are low value activities. Do your high value activities first. Make sure you're prioritizing all your high value activities first. And, that can be different in different organizations. For a startup, it's usually what's going to create the most customer value, or what's the biggest benefit to the business or the team, right? And we can use simple ways to highlight if something is high value or low value. But most people spend a lot of their days in low value activities, never really get to the high value activities. That alone will completely change how productive you are and how people perceive you. It will change the trajectory of someone's career if they really focus on ruthless prioritization. And the third one is problem definition. I know I said it earlier. If you take nothing away, start asking this question: which problem are we solving? Which problem are we solving? Because a lot of times we're stuck in tasks or deliverables, and if we don't know what problem it's solving, we're not producing the outcome that people think they're going to get. And that leads to rework and frustration and more feedback and those sorts of things. So high performers, it's not just one thing. It is a combination of things. These top 3 will significantly alter someone's trajectory if you do all 3 of those. It's hard to do. I mean, I even build in, I build in the deep work in my day, that sort of thing. It took me a while to get used to that. It took me a while to be really productive there, those sorts of things. I build in strategic thinking time, and I see what it does to executives and how fast people advance in their careers. Once they do this, they're always shocked because nobody else does it.
Yeah. Is there something in particular special about that 2-hour block versus a 1-hour block versus a 3-hour block? Like, what's that about?
Yeah. So There's something called context switching, and that's when we switch from one task to another. Often it can take up to 40% of the time, which means if I switch from writing an email to filling out a spreadsheet about the budget for this project, that sort of thing, I've got to figure out, where am I in the spreadsheet? Which line was I on? What was I doing? And then when I come back to the email, where was I? I was in the middle of that line,
Right.
that sort of
Right.
thing. And so that is really costly.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing about deep work is, number one, removing the interruptions, making sure that you're focused on something. The guy who came up with the term deep work is named Cal Newport. He wrote a book called Deep Work. And they started studying people. We're so interrupted. We go from meeting to meeting. We've got, emails, we've got phone calls, we've got Slack, we've got everything else. What they were seeing is our brain wasn't getting to the point where it could do deep work. We need 30, some people 30, 45 minutes on a subject to really find that flow so that we can do really effective work. If we're interrupted or if we're context switching, we never get that. He really recommends 3 hours, and it's two 90-minute blocks. Most executives I know can't fit in those 3 hours. We have this 90-minute time frame for most people that's the maximum amount of time they can really focus.
Mm-hmm.
And so the 2 hours is a way to get some of that 90 minutes in, but also have a little bit of cushion on the ends if things they get interrupted, things like that. So 3 hours would be ideal, but I don't know anybody that can kind of get in 3 hours. I do know people that are kind of middle managers. More of their job is about execution with some management responsibilities that can get 3 hours in. But most executives, I either try to get 90 minutes or 2 hours if we can.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think I've heard at least 10 reasons why our listeners should petition their executives to bring you on to talk about alignment and accelerating performance and creating successful teams and all of these things. But I think, like, at a very minimum, EAs can bring some of these ideas to the table, to the suggestion box. And I think, like, how hot is that to be able to say, I have a thought, like, I've noticed that you're not practicing this. And I think if I were able to shift things in your schedule to give you this time and give you this uninterrupted space, that could be an absolute accelerator and really amplify, So I think, like, there's a lot here. Again, I think the best course of action is to do the actual deep work and go through a program with your guidance. But it's nice to know that there's also kind of some small suggestions that they can offer as things to try and practice, see how it works, right?
Totally agree. And, definitely the brain types piece is usually the fastest one, because we just, if we watch TV at all, we are familiar. That's the easiest one to really adapt to the other person. Mm-hmm. And then the other things built around that, particularly around alignment or building in that deep work, that can really change someone's ability to focus, ability to get stuff done. And so, I hope people take away that there are definitely small things they can do that make a huge difference. And then you look like a rock star. That's exactly what I want for every executive assistant.
Hero, right?
To be a rock star. Because most, the intention is there. And one of the things the reason I really started High Performance Orgs is, the science is there. We've learned more in the last 10 years about what high performance looks like because of the science than we did the 100 years before that. And it's not getting out to people. And these things really we all need these skills. And particularly now with AI disruption and economic anxiety and all the change that people are going through, being able to really develop these skills, one of the things we found is that it can increase productivity and output by 400 to 500% per individual. Yeah. Which is insane. And now that you've got tools that can actually support a lot of the things you were doing, really make you a rock star.
Yeah. And that really is everything in this line of work, is if you can achieve rock star status in the mind of your executive and they're showing up like Mick Jagger, then everybody is winning, like that's really the That's the key. So for our
And
listeners,
you get
yes.
you get the reward and the emotional sustenance from doing great work and being recognized. So many
Yeah.
people, you appreciate it, but you're not really appreciated like a rock star, and that's what we really want for people, because that changes everything. That changes it also changes your how much you get paid, and how frequently you get promoted, that sort of thing too, if you're seen as a rock star. And more opens the door for lots more possibilities too.
It does. And I think everyone, especially now, given the two things you just said, AI disruption, economic insecurity, like I think everyone is looking for reassurance and to be in the safe zone. And how do I become untouchable? Well, I can promise you that if you're the unlock and the rock star for your executive, and they see you as an inextricable and vital part of their team, that is the biggest reinforcement of your security, period. And there's a
Absolutely.
lot that you've shared today that I think would really help our listeners to elevate themselves to that rock star status if they're not already there. So for those who you've given us a beautiful taste, this is an appetizer of what Coop has to offer. It's a little amuse-bouche to whet the palate here. But Coop has so much. You're like a wealth of, just an absolute well of knowledge and depth. And I so enjoy also just how you show up for me and for my team. Like the way that you come in is in such a soothing and appeasing and calming, but really like astute way. You just have a wonderful manner. And so I can't endorse you enough on an interpersonal way, but also for your knowledge. It's this beautiful combination of how you show up, but also what you know. So for those who would like to go deeper with some of the things that we've kind of just lightly touched on today, how can people get in touch with you? What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, my company's called High Performance Orgs, and the website is highperformanceorgs.com, or you can shoot an email to coop@highperformanceorgs.com. And love to support anyone who's really looking to make sure their executives are kind of at the top of their game. That's what we need now more than anything else. And I know it's really rough out there. There's a lot of executive roles that are going unfilled because people don't want them. So I know it's, and I reflect on that as that's got to be a lot tougher for EAs right now, just because the pressure is there. And, even though these executives I know would love to be perfect individuals, they usually take it out on the people right, close to them. Mm-hmm. So I know it's rougher for EAs now than it has been in a while.
Yeah. I think that's accurate. So I have a final question for you. We usually ask our executive assistant guests who they would like to support, if they could support anybody, but that doesn't really make sense for you. So I'm going to ask you a slightly tweaked version, which is if you had the opportunity to coach anyone, executive, leader, team, who would you choose to support and why? Or I'm sorry, not support, coach, and why?
There are so many, but I think right now, I would. You said past, present, or future, that sort of thing. Past, it would have been Nelson Mandela, to be honest. Pivotal leaders in history, like a Steve Jobs too. I think it would have been fun, particularly when he came back and he was kind of, known for not being the kindest person. I think I could have helped him see how, actually treating people well gets you better results, those sorts of things. But I think right now, I'm really fascinated. I did a talk in Sao Paulo not too long ago to the American Institute for Artificial Intelligence on brain types, which we're talking about today, and specifically groupthink and how dangerous groupthink is. And this is a bunch of artificial intelligence engineers, and they were at the time working on self-driving cars, and we got into this discussion, and I provided this scenario and asked, if there's a car coming to an intersection and there's, a person with a child in a stroller and a truck on the left and a car in the right lane, how do you program the software to figure out which one you're going to hit, right? And one of the engineers said, well, the value of a human life is $5 million, $3 million for a child. that car is 250,000 and that truck is, 450,000. And so we would probably hit the car. And my thought was, why are you hitting anyone? Like, why? I understand that there's a logic here, but
Right.
Part of it, I set you up in the question, but the ethics of AI is really fascinating to me. And so I guess I would coach Sam Altman if I had the chance to. And we have mutual acquaintances, so maybe he'll hear this and call me, but
we know people at OpenAI, so you know what? We'll put the word out. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there for sure. For sure.
Being an innovator influencer brain type, I want to be, I want to pay respect to, everybody in technology and what they're doing, but there's a lot of groupthink happening, and you need people that ask different types of questions in those conversations,
right?
Particularly now. And
to introduce perspective at times. And what do you think? What kind of coaching do you think Nelson Mandela needed?
I have no idea, but someone who's really trying to change history has got to be struggling with things. And, for me, it's not necessarily what I know, it's being a thought partner. How do you unpack this particular really complex issue? What are the things that you're not naturally seeing? Those are the types of conversations I really like to be in. It's not necessarily my perspective. It's just, how can I partner with an executive who's really got a ton on their plate? And a lot of times it's in domains like I know nothing about, like literally rocket science, literally, working with Michelin star chefs, things like that. I work with people like that all the time. So I don't know anything about their domain, but a lot of times they don't know their own brain type. They don't know what they're they know when they're irritated, but they don't know how to say, this is my irritator, please don't do this to people, that sort of thing. So a lot of times it's really helping them, see things they don't see or ask questions that they wouldn't think to ask themselves.
Yeah. It's great. Well, I knew this was going to be a great conversation, and you certainly delivered, as you always do. This was, as always, a learning experience and also fun and enjoyable. So really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I guess that's a wrap.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I hope this really serves your audience. I really do.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I know it absolutely will, and I'm excited to hear from our listeners once it's released, because I love when we can provide new resources and new ways of thinking and new tools, and I think that you've absolutely offered that today. So thank you.
Awesome. My pleasure. Thank you.
Reach is brought to you by Maven Recruiting Group, who specializes in placing executive assistants and support staff to the Bay Area's most prominent executives and companies. If you've enjoyed being part of our podcast community and are interested in becoming part of our candidate community, we're currently hiring for roles in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles. You can visit us at www.mavenrec.com to see some of the roles we're currently working on and to submit your resume.